Okay, so this is a quadratic equation that we are going to solve by factoring. And so factoring is usually going to be the easiest way if you don't have a calculator. Sometimes they're not factorable, so you'd have to use the quadratic formula, but factoring is usually our go-to method. And so anytime you're solving a quadratic equation, it's a little bit different than a linear equation. You don't want variables on one side and numbers on the other. You want everything on one side of the equal sign. And so here's our equal sign. The first thing we're going to do with this equation is get everything to either the left side or the right side. I usually make it to where the x squared term is positive. And so I'm going to move everything to the left side. And so to do that, we have to get rid of everything on the right side. And so we're going to have to subtract this 2x squared because it's positive. And then that's going to leave us with 2x squared on the left, the plus 3, the equal sign, and the 7x. We need to move the 7x over, but there's no other x term to combine it with. X squareds and x's can't be combined. They're not like terms. And so when we subtract the 7x, we're going to put it right in between the terms, but not combine anything. And so that leaves us with 2x squared minus 7x plus 3. And then on the right side, our equal sign doesn't disappear. It still equals something, and it equals 0 because we canceled everything. And so notice I'm doing the opposite signs of what was already here. Whenever you cross the line, change the sign. That's what I say to my Algebra 1 kiddos. And so from there, you're ready to factor. And so this isn't going to be easy to factor because our a value isn't 1. And so the first thing we have to do to factor this is multiply your a times your c. 2 times 3 is 6. And so your a value, your b value, and your c value is very important you're arranged this way, otherwise you're not going to be ready to factor. And so a times c is 6. And so we're looking for two numbers that multiply to 6 but add to this middle number, the b value, -7. And so I make a list of all the factors of 6. So a lot of people forget the case of 1 and 6, 2, 3. And so those are all the numbers that multiply to give me 6. The only possible pair that could work to get to a 7 is the 1 and 6. And in order for them to add to -7, they both have to be negative. That way they multiply to a +6, but add to a -7. Those are what I call the magic numbers. You use those magic numbers to split apart this -7x into -1x and -6x. It's called splitting the middle. That's why we needed it to add to -7. And so then we can bring down this +3 and then bring down the 2x squared. And so we have 4 terms now. And now that we have 4 terms, we're going to divide it down the middle so that we can factor 2 at a time, factoring by grouping. And so looking at the first pair, looking at the numbers 2 and 1, the only number that divides both of those is 1. We're looking for a GCF. And then between x and x squared, the most we can divide by is x. So 1x would be our GCF. You don't have to write the 1. Some people prefer it. And so then we divide. 2 divided by 1 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Over here, -1 divided by 1 is -1. X divided by x cancels, so we don't have an x on the last number. Okay, for the second set of parentheses, anytime your leading term is negative, your GCF automatically needs to be negative. Doesn't matter that this is positive. If this number, or this first number is negative, this number needs to be negative. And so between 3 and 6, 3 divides both of those evenly. I always start with the smaller number and see if it divides the bigger. And then we can't get an x because there's no x here. And so -3 is our GCF. Negative 6 divided by negative 3 is positive 2. And then we still have the x. 3 divided by negative 3 is negative 1. And so when you get to this step, make sure your parentheses match. That means you've done everything correctly up until this point. And this 2x minus 1 is one of your factors. The other factor comes from what is in front of the parentheses in the same order. So 1x minus 3. Again, you don't have to write the 1. You can leave it invisible. And so this whole time, all we've done is factor the original quadratic to its factored form. It's still set equal to 0. Now that we have it in its factored form and set equal to 0, that's important, is if you multiply two things together and get 0, that means one of the factors was 0. 2 times 3 can't get you 0, but 2 times 0 would give you 0. And so from here, it's called the zero product property. Either this factor equals 0, or this factor. A factor is anything that is multiplying, equals 0. So you set each set of parentheses equal to 0. And so now you have two linear equations to solve. And so to solve a linear equation, you use your inverse operations. And so for this left side, the first thing we do is get rid of the number that's not being multiplied, that's not attached. And so we get rid of a minus 1 by adding 1. That leaves me with 2x equals 1. And then this is invisible multiplication. If you need to, put your multiplication dot, because now we have to divide to get rid of the 2. And so x equals 1/2 is one of our solutions. Usually fraction form is the best. Make sure it's a simplified fraction. Over here, it's a one-step equation. All we have to do is add 3. So x equals 3 is our other solution.